an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire C, Book 2 of Dawn and Darkness, Chapters 8, 9, and 10. In these chapters, finally, Jyrene cottons on to who Kellerak is, and she begins blasting green fire from inside this horrific little cocoon of flesh. Meanwhile, Calder is having a weird dream with Kellerak, and it's making everything feel more organized than I thought, which I do not like. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. George is in the chat saying, I bet the elders have all the answers. If we just listen to Kellerak, we could live pandemic-free forever. George, I desperately want to believe that there's somebody who has all the answers. You know, even if it is the elders. Okay, then they have them. Give them to us. I'll do what needs doing. But the thing is, even if they had the answers, George, who would listen? That's the question. Okay, this starts off with the dream. And again, we have one of those little excerpts that warns us a little bit that I don't like. Each of the great elders has their own goals, and they are often in conflict. But why have they not destroyed each other? Why have they not destroyed us? On some level, towards some mutual objective, they must be working together. I don't like that. Here's why. I have been assuming that all of the elders are completely separate in their objectives, in their desires. And by desire, I don't even mean objective. I just mean the way that they want to spend their time. The idea that they may all actually be working together towards something, they are already so scary and so OP that the concept of them as an organized group is too much for me to handle. And granted, they function on a completely different understanding of the passage of time. I don't know if it's going to, for most people, will it matter that they're working together? I don't know if it's going to show, for the vast majority of people who have lived in this empire. How long has it been since the emperor unified everybody? Was it 2,000 years? I feel like I'm overestimating that. I'm trying to remember. But within that time, there were generations of people who never experienced the fallout, and there's no knowledge for them that they were part of any greater plan. Maybe they experienced an elder attack here or there, but it was never going to be something that was a massive upheaval war kind of situation. So even though it is very terrifying, I'm trying to kind of keep in mind that the elders can get as organized as they want, but they have this sort of glacial pace that means they may perhaps be easier to deal with due to that. That said, their power is so intense that even the beginnings of them growing organized feels like it's going to have giant ripple effects. And we know that the emperor misjudged how far Akhmagut was going to go in terms of his speed. The emperor thought Akhmagut was going to work very slowly and kind of was resting a bit, going, oh, we won't have to worry about him until years and years from now. And he turned out to be quite wrong. And Akhmagut is I think he was aware of exactly what the Emperor was expecting him to do. And he was not correct. So, I just have a lot of anxiety about this. The elders really scare me. This is just what I'm going to come back to with this series over and over again. And I think that's great. You want them to be this scary. You want them to be this constant uneasy presence. There are so many stories where there is this giant big bad, and the big bad does not really feel like they are actually a major threat, oftentimes because they are so personified and so human seeming in many ways. Even if they're allegedly not human, they have an ego, they have pride, they have a delight in cruelty sometimes that can feel like, human beings that we have seen. And so it's quantifiable. There's something comforting about knowing what they're about. The elders are absolutely foreign concepts. They are alien. I do not understand them. I do not know what they want. I don't know how they do what they do. And that, in combination with the fact that they literally can't seem to even be killed, it's just really rude. Just, you guys already have a lot going for you. I feel like dying is the least you could do. I'm just saying. Oh, you know what, George? I was going to mention that. George is asking me, have you read any H.P. Lovecraft? The whole series is very derived from his style of horror. I appreciate you mentioning that because I had meant to say something about that last episode and totally forgot. I haven't read any H.P. Lovecraft, mostly because I have heard that he is horrifically racist. I don't know anything about his writing style. I have never delved into any of his material, mostly because I was just warned off of that. And the concept of unknowable horrors wasn't something that really appealed to me, to be honest. I really like that I've been introduced to this concept by Will White, who I already really love as a writer already. For an aside, I love his writing so much, and I am just worried about that thing that happens where you grow to really like somebody's work to the point that when they release anything that doesn't speak specifically to you, your crushing disappointment will be almost unbearable. I am trying so hard not to let that happen to me, but I love what he does with everything, and it's just it's simultaneously so enjoyable and also really intimidating as somebody who would like to write herself. And anyway, if I'm going to be introduced to a concept like this that I don't love in terms of giant unknowable creatures, this is the guy to do it. So Calder is asleep and has this weird dream that Bliss interrupts, which I do not know what to make of it. Bliss's whole concept of her abilities, what she is, what she can contact and not, I don't know what to make of her either. And we still haven't really seen the ceiling on her abilities. She makes me the fact that she just pops into his dream. Truly, guys, what is that? So I'm just gonna. Calder stood in the courtyard outside the Emperor's quarters, watching the guards hack away at gray-green flesh. Bliss ran her hands along the skin like a child trying to find her way out of a cave. The stars were still out, and Calder didn't remember getting out of bed. The bearer of Tearfang has already given you her tour. I thought I'd give you mine. Kellerak turned to him, the steel over his eyes glinting silver in the moonlight, and smiled. And Calder mentions, we really do keep running into each other. And Kellerak says, yeah, I have spoken with you more than any other mortal person. He doesn't actually say, no, I'm looking at it. He doesn't say mortal person. He says anyone else. That's interesting. This century, some would say I favor you too heavily. And Calder is like, you and Akhmagut, it feels almost like I'm being manipulated. To which Kellerak just basically says, you are. Oh, you're absolutely being manipulated. Like, I don't even know if manipulation is the right word, because that suggests that you have another function and we're forcing you to do something other than that. But you don't have another function. This is pretty much what you're for. And it is in combination with the way that Calder is spoken of as the future emperor later on. He has sustained an awful lot of insults in this book. I'm not mad about it. I think that he does need to be cut a little bit down to size every now and then. He can get kind of cocky. But damn, that is a really aggressive way to put it. And Kellerak says, without Nakothi's heart, I could never have built this. And Calder is like, what have you built? And he says, however imperfectly, however temporarily, I have created an organism that can control the Emperor's optasia. Without the attack on the other navigator's ship, you wouldn't have ended up here. Not for a long time, at least. And by then, certain windows would have passed. I don't want to destroy the world. Only Urgnaut wants that. I like the world the way it is. Bringing you here was one domino in a very long line. One note in a symphony that lasts millennia. I don't like it. And truly, Calder later on is just like, man, it's one thing to know that you're being used as a pawn. And it's another thing to be straight up told to your face, you're a pawn. What do you want to do about it? It's just, again, emphasizing how small he is, how insignificant he is, and how even Kellerak even says something like, I might be telling you a thing that you don't like so that you will do the opposite, which might be the exact thing I wanted you to do to begin with. There really just does come a point where it's mean-spirited, Kellerak. I mean, Christ. Essentially, every single thing you do is probably not your own. I won't say it's not free will, because he is making choices. But how much is the free will if you're making choices without full information and full access to that, you know? So anyway, you can't steer the ship unless you turn the wheel. I need you where you are, doing exactly what you're going to. The great elder was interrupted by a girl's pale face popping up and staring at him from an inch away. Bliss frowned into what, to her, should look like empty space. Dreams are like cobwebs, she said. I don't like them in my hair. When the guild head waved her hand, the courtyard vanished, and Calder woke upright in bed. I really, on the one hand, love the fact that she's fucking with Kellerak and his whole posturing. It just really does feel like he wants to talk about what a big man he is a little bit. On the other hand, I really want to know what else he was going to say. I don't know if it would have been any more meaningful than what he had said so far. Probably he wouldn't show any more of his hand than he had already. It was most likely going to just be a continuation of him patting himself on the back and not helpful. However, I just wish I had gotten to hear everything. And I love the fact, this is one of the things that I think good writers do. Calder immediately is like, okay, that seemed like a dream, but it definitely really happened. That was an actual conversation. And also Bliss was there and noticed it. There's no questioning. There's no like, oh, what a weird dream. Or like, it seemed like Bliss helped, but how could she have? He just takes it for granted. Basically what I said, which is, we don't have a ceiling on Bliss's abilities. If she can invade dreams and disperse them, okay. You know, and there is nothing more tiresome than, as a reader, accepting that something is definitely true and then having to sit there and watch the main character puzzle through it, not believing until some later date. So boring, especially considering, and this is something that I have talked with Rashawn about, because I'm covering Song of Ice and Fire with her, and there's a lot in that to do with like visions, warging into animals, seeing the future. And there's a character who immediately accepts that something John saw in a dream was true. There is no question for him. He is like, what did you see? Tell me everything. Because he takes it as fact, which there are so many stories out there where they're like, oh, it wouldn't be realistic for him to be believed. We need him to argue that it was real, and for other people to like ignore him and find out almost until it's too late. But the fact is, human beings are super fucking superstitious. The real reaction most people would get to saying that they had a very detailed dream about a thing that is about to happen or currently happening, most people would be taken seriously by at least a couple of folks in their like company. That is, to me, much more realistic. Folks believe in the symbolism of fucking anything. You can tell them about like my mother, she goes with the numbers on her speedometer when she parks somewhere and uses those to determine numerologically what the significance is of her getting those when she arrived at this particular place. A speedometer she's using. It's nothing, at least in my opinion. I don't believe it's anything. She completely buys it. So everybody who writes it like nobody would ever believe it, they'd think it was, you know, your fanciful imagination. No, they wouldn't. People buy it. People love that shit and trust that shit and want to think that it's something helping them from the other side in some way. So anyway, all that to say, thank you, fucking Calder, for immediately going, okay, yeah, that was real. And he is thinking about Bliss and how much she may know about his relationship with Kellerak. It's interesting because once we go to Bliss's POV, she doesn't seem to reference anything to do with Calder and his deal. That is not to say that she doesn't know, because Bliss is a very like in the moment sort of character. And I don't think she'd think of anything relating to Calder's relationship with Kellerak if it wasn't immediately relevant to whatever's happening in that moment. But I don't think she does. No. We'll see. Why let Calder know he was being manipulated? It was one thing to know he was dancing to an Elder tune, and quite another to have Kellerak tell him to his face that he was nothing more than a piece on a game board. And then he does the whole like, what if he's trying to get me to do the opposite? And we get this wonderful quote. If you find yourself thinking in circles, stop thinking. Not one of the great philosophers of history, obviously. Calder's father, Roderick. Calder had always found the words surprisingly wise. When thinking wasn't productive, he had to start acting. Yo, if I could just internalize that in some way, genuinely internalize it, I feel like that would solve so many of my problems. Y'all, overthinking, what a curse it is. I think a lot of us know about that. So he's like, I'm just going to go talk to her and see what the fuck she knows about all of this. Maybe she'll kill me, but like, oh well, there's so much happening that is completely out of my control. What can I do? And he stops for a moment and says, why do I want to stop Kellerak? I don't know, like, what it is he's trying to do. Every time that he has gotten in contact with me, he's helped me in some way. And I am not responsible for saving the world. And it says, he had just started pulling on the pants when his door swung open and Andal walked in. And Andal is a little bit salty because apparently everybody has seen him now that the situation has turned the way that it has. They believe him to be basically Calder's manservant, which is quite a turn from what he had started out as, which was a babysitter. A babysitter with standing. You know, it was not an insulting job. He had a lot of power. But it was, it was the power over Calder, and now it's like everybody assumes it's the other way around. And while maybe it is, I don't really think it is. I think that Andal is who he is, and he is going to maintain a kind of dignity no matter what position he's put in by Calder, because that's just who he is. So Calder gets these robes that are extremely extravagant and, meant for an emperor. And he puts them on and is in the midst of like getting ready to leave the room. And Andal is like, the guild heads want to meet with you. And he thinks that they know that this is a response to the fact that Bliss found out about his relationship with Kellerak and that they're asking to see him, to confront him about this. And Andal immediately like sees his face and says, okay, what did you do? What did you do? And Calder's like, what do you mean? I don't even know what you're asking. And Andal's like, you asked why right away in a tone that suggests you have a suspicion already of why they want to see you, which suggests that you did something. And he just says, you have quite the imagination, Andal. Oh, Calder, not you gaslighting him. So he goes into this room with this huge table. And here is the head of the Magisters Guild, who we know winds up dead a little bit later, Vikendi Maxius. And essentially this entire conversation is about the fact that somehow the press has figured out some of what's going on. They are alleging the press made a guess and it was accidentally correct. I think that's ludicrous. To me, that's such an absurd coincidence that it doesn't make sense that everyone is accepting that explanation. The only thing that makes it rational that they would believe that is they are so proud. The concept that there's like an internal leak or cause just hasn't occurred to them. I'm assuming this is also Kellerak's maneuvering somehow, but I don't know how he would do this. Not to say that he couldn't, because he apparently can just appear in dreams and stuff, but would he? There comes a point for me where God's causing things to happen. It's almost like if you're that direct, why not just do everything yourself? What is it that you're trying to even preserve humanity for? This illusion that things are separate from your objective. If everything that happened to cause something, you personally had a hand in. I don't know. It's just kind of that line that you have to walk a little bit. So yeah, it's in all caps, Urzaia in chaos, imperialists to blame, the headline declared. The article went on to describe the riots in the East, food shortages, and guild-on-guild violence, all precipitated by the imperialists, those guilds who wanted to raise up a second emperor after the first, may his soul fly free, who was lost to an elder attack. The writer even managed to insinuate it may have been the imperialists who engineered the emperor's death in the first place. And I love this moment so much. Cheska says, the problem is the news sheets are all over us, which means the people don't trust us. And if the people don't trust us, they won't trust whatever slack-jawed idiot we stick on the throne. Later on, Mackenzie Maxius calls him a nobody. And Calder is just like, let it roll off my back. I'm just going to let it roll off. It doesn't even bother me. It stings a little bit, but he just tries to overlook it. And Calder says, I don't understand this. They say that this was happening yesterday. The fastest ship could not possibly get there in 2 weeks. And Cheska's like, yeah, with fantastic weather, an empty hold, clear sailing, maybe. That's what hurts the worst, Teach said, frustration bleeding into her voice. There's no way they could have known. It's entirely fabricated. Is it? Or was it a setup? It seems quite obvious to me that it had to have been a setup. But nobody even mentions that possibility, which I find kind of weird. So what Calder initially is like, well, just tell them to retract it. We'll have somebody investigate. And Maxius is like, investigate and prove them right. They're lying. They happen to be lucky, but they're not wrong. And if we knew that it wasn't true, we would have just done that in the first place. And now we have to figure out how to deal with the fact that everybody is aware that we have fucked up. So this is when Calder says, well, how big of a disaster even is it? What did we do? And Maxius says, we successfully assassinated Alagaeus, regent of the East. Calder stared at him, speechless. Possibly Joran as well, though he was staying with the consultants. And for some reason, the fact that they were behind the assassination of a regent, I had forgotten. There's so much that's like interlinked in this story. There's a lot more politics happening in this story than there is in Cradle. And I confess, I listened to this conversation and then I went back and re-listened to it because I just wanted to make sure. And yeah, we knew that Max's old group had been taken by the Magisters. So I don't know why this moment came as a surprise to me. I just kind of lost the thread, I think. And Calder is just like, my God, if they killed a regent, like, what are they capable of? And he's thinking about how if absolutely any one of the regents had said they were interested in being emperor, that would have been it. He would never have gotten the job. They maintained that only the emperor could rule the empire. In a sense, they were the pillars on which the independent guilds rested, and they were led by Esther VI, the most terrifying woman in history. There were as many horror stories about her as myths, none of them comforting to her opponents. And Maxius says, it's not a disaster. If we act now, we can salvage this. We can even turn it into an advantage, but we must act. And this is when we cut to Bliss. She's thinking about waiting for Elsa Greyweather to return, Calder's mom. She could wait, and she would, because there was no realistic alternative, but she didn't want to. And she had sent Elsa away only 6 days ago, and she had been proud of that decision at the time. It had been an attempt to keep Elsa both safe and busy while Bliss took care of her son, and it had worked beautifully. Bliss was pleased at her own foresight and her tact in handling the situation. Forgive me again here, George, because I know that I have lost a lot of the last book and its events. how much genuine affection does Bliss have for Elsa? And how much of it is like deeply, what's the word I want? Like has a hidden agenda. It feels like she actually cares about Elsa, but I can't recall what their relationship was really like. And I just think it's interesting that Elsa seems to be the one she's closest to. I'm just trying to remember what that was like. So meanwhile, we get Tharlos in her head. What if those watchmen behind you weren't watchmen at all? What if they were dogs? Dogs standing on their hind legs, wearing black coats and carrying spikes like they were people. Wouldn't that be hilarious? The thought from her vessel didn't come in words precisely, but in feelings. Like Bliss would be in for the joke of a lifetime if only she would let a great elder turn her subordinates into two-legged dogs. She slapped the spear through her coat, a quick reprimand, even though its idea did sound funny. And she could use a laugh. It was good for your mood. That is so scary. The idea that it isn't being pushed as like, oh, let's do something to be destructive. It's a joke. It's almost like there's no consequences to it. Which, of course, to an elder, there would be no consequences to it. Like for them, of course not. So she'd learned that there was someone trapped inside this like shell of flesh. But that knowledge came with its own problems. Gray-green tendrils whipped out, suddenly aggressive, lashing her watchmen and two of the Imperial guards who were still cutting at the flesh with their weapons. A man screamed, a woman pleaded, and all 6 of them backed off. Bliss didn't. The Elder Wall had never been so violent before, which provided interesting opportunities for observation. And none of them whip at her, to which she thinks they know better. Which truly, if that isn't some big dick energy, I don't know what is. Just going, of course they aren't going to fuck with me. They know better than to do that. It's just a given. George says, yeah, I don't know if we ever get a glimpse into their relationship. When we first met Bliss, we heard Elsa be very afraid of her, and it seems she knew just how non-human she was. I think we see more of her kindness and fun when she speaks with Calder, but maybe we are supposed to infer that Bliss is like that with Elsa as well. She has saved Calder a couple times, seemingly for no other reason than it would make Elsa sad, or that she would like that. Okay. So I didn't really like miss anything because I remember them having a conversation. I remember that moment in like, I think it was in a tea room that everything changes very suddenly. And I can't remember if it was just Elsa there or if Calder was there. But it was meant to be a demonstration of like what she could do. There just seems to be a kind of attachment there, which I find interesting. And I just can't decide how much of that is real affection and how much of it is based on some other purpose that Bliss may have because she is a wild card. I don't understand her. So it makes me nervous whenever she seems to like focus on any particular person because I just think that's bad news for that person. And that's not necessarily true, but forgive me, I can't help but be very suspicious. So she's trying to think about who could possibly be trapped inside. Are they being held hostage? Are they there willingly? Are they mastering the elder itself, or are they there as fucking food for it? Bliss didn't believe in luck, because whether chance outcomes were good or bad depended entirely on the opinions of the observer. But in her opinion, as an observer, what followed was extremely good luck. She was just about to remove her hand from the skin of the Elder Wall, when a wave of energy passed through the air around her and entered into the Elder flesh. The wall absorbed a surge of nourishment, like a plant's thirsty roots being washed in fresh rainwater for the first time. The tendrils withdrew, the membrane bulged outward, elder muscles grew stronger. And it says the elder wall's vitality wasn't infinite, and it wasn't coming from within. It was being sustained from without, probably calling power from elsewhere with the Optasia. It was entirely possible that there was a circle of elder cultists somewhere in the Aeon, even now, dying one by one to feed their lives into the growth of this wall. Well, as far as Bliss was concerned, the world would be better off with fewer elder worshippers in it, even though they had entirely on accident given her the clue she needed. She didn't need to destroy the wall. She had to drill through it, piercing a tunnel into its heart. It wouldn't rejuvenate until it received another influx of vitality, which it couldn't summon if they disconnected the Optasia. So, all she had to do was pierce the hide while avoiding its attacks, bore through 4 or 5 yards of rubbery flesh, locate the Optasia in the darkness, kill the person protecting it, and remove the throne from elder control without destroying the device itself. Come to think of it, there were quite a lot of steps to this process. She should probably write them down. And then is like, oh, also would tell me to ask for help. Okay, I'm going to ask for help. And the last thought we get from her is how she had found Kellerek spying on her. But she had managed to figure out his secret anyway. So this is interesting. I don't think that we knew just how much, like, the elder worshippers were involved in this. Obviously, if Jyrene is in there, they have some participation going on. But Jyrene is so disconnected from them. So finding out that probably there are elders out there sacrificing themselves for this, that is wild. I do not know what they are thinking. What are they hoping to gain? Truly, these people are mad women and men. I'm thinking mad women because of Jyrene. Jyrene, girl, what are you doing? Don't. Stop it. Get some help. So Maxius says, we go back to that. We provoked the regions because we didn't expect to be exposed publicly. We had a calculated reason. And Teach is saying, well, then we should announce the new emperor as soon as possible. And they can't quite agree about this. It's like Cheska is bringing up, in my opinion, some pretty good points about how if they just throw somebody out there as like, hey, this is the new emperor, it feels really abrupt and it's coming from a source that people already don't really trust. They seem to be certain if they handle it the right way and word things the right way, people are going to feel comforted by the fact that there's somebody in place that's like protecting them. And basically what like Maxius says is they've had years to get used to the idea that there's a new emperor coming. So to a point, oh well, there's nothing we can do about the fact that they're not going to be happy about this. And I guess that's true too. I can't fault that logic really. Like people are gonna always begin to get used to whatever's happening at the moment. And it seems like they haven't had an emperor for 5 years. 5 years is long enough for people to start kind of feeling like maybe we were fine without one. And then to drop it that you have one. Not even we have some candidates in mind, but just we've picked one. I don't know. I kind of feel Cheska's position, but I also don't really know what difference it makes. It depends on how much power they're giving the people. So essentially, this is when they come up with the idea of getting the other, like especially the consultants, to attack them, to make it seem like they are the victim in this situation. And I would just like to take this moment to point out that this tactic is very real. And it is used by the powers that be, often police, especially police and the military, they position themselves in such a way after having done something completely unconscionable. They find a way to provoke or even stage situations to make it look like they're the victims, actually. And this was something that during a lot of the protesting that was happening over the past few years, there were a lot of photos circulating of people who were pretending to be protesters in the crowd, but were actually police. And you could tell because of some of the gear they were wearing. You could tell by the shape of cuffs in their back pockets. You could tell by just that there were various giveaways. And sometimes the violence or the property damage that occurred was instigated by those people in order to make it look like, oh, these protesters are practically terrorists. They're out here destroying things. And they weren't. It was a setup, and people buy that shit. So anyway, this whole bit here, it's so infuriating to read because it's so constantly, this is also a tactic of just straight up abusers. And what they do is they attack and they immediately turn things around once you start to get to defend yourself in any way and pretend that they are in fact the victim. And I'm looking at you, Johnny Depp. And yes, I know. I'm just saying. So this is their whole plan, which we know that they try to set up, and it doesn't quite work initially. Unfortunately, it does eventually because of Shara's shaky attachment to her object, her sword. Or I guess it's not really a sword. Is it just a blade, Siphon? But I want to take some satisfaction over the fact that their initial attempt to provoke doesn't work. It's just a shame because we know it does eventually. But I will say, Maxius does die. So that's something. And I also think it's interesting that as much as I've grown to like Calder, he has gotten tied in with these people who I frankly think are monstrous. And I understand that, I understand some of what they're trying to do. Shara's side is also kind of monstrous. The fucking... yeah. But he's thinking about the fact that if they don't wind up on top, he is going to be an ally to the people who killed a fucking regent, which is essentially treason. And that is not going to go well for him. So he is starting to get distinctly nervous about the situation. So this is when Teach says, take rotating squads and blockade the road leading to the Luminian headquarters at Hightower. Use whatever excuse you can to take a pilgrim into custody or get a knight to challenge you. Hold the casualties to a minimum. We just need proof that they attacked us. I don't want you to waste men. And this is when Calder said, well, I mean, I understand that we need to take some action here, but also what about just making up our own shit? They made up a story and yeah, it wound up being right, but we could just make something up. And Cheska is like, they would want to verify any story that we've fed people, and they'll find out if it's not true. Speaking of witnesses, she popped open a wooden case revealing a set of white candles. We need to get a team on these yesterday. The alchemists and consultants are better funded than we are, so we might as well tap into what funds we can. And these candles, I remember them being brought up, and the Guild of Witnesses are the ones that can use them. You burn the candle and it releases information, right? It's almost like watching something on television, but the candle, it's a one use only, if I'm not mistaken. And it's gone after. We haven't seen them used. We have heard them talked about. unless I'm forgetting. But I don't recall ever actually seeing them being put to use. Let's see. George says, yes, one use, and it lets you perfectly relive a memory stored. Okay. So it's kind of like the memory tablets in Cradle, but those are, I won't say they have unlimited uses because like they are powered with Madra that begins to leak out of them, and eventually they don't have much left to them, but they certainly aren't just one use. The concept of using the candle, though, it's a kind of neat idea. I kind of like this, and I'm very interested in seeing it. That's what I'm thinking of. George says, we saw Nibarius, quote, use them by reading the intent in them and not burning it. Thank you for that reminder. I know there was something, but I don't feel like it got lit. Okay, so she says, we're not going to abandon you on the side of the road, Calder. Settle down. We never needed you to read these. Just carry them to us. We have other uses for you. That was actually somewhat of a relief, but Teach took over by drumming armored fingertips on the table. This brings us neatly to our second point of order. We must announce an emperor immediately. And this is when the issues that I had mentioned get brought up about, like, you know, ways to handle it so that people will actually accept it. And there's this, like, what's the word I want? Almost like a flyer, I guess, that they have constructed. And it's written in such a way as to make him seem like a godsend who will protect them. And it's such like, we are so lucky to have him. And Maxius says there are several versions of this for various audiences. This one is primarily aimed at guild members and their families, but we have variants for laborers, nobility, and the educated classes. This also can't be our only announcement. We have to send a coronation date along with it. And Teach is like, all right, we can do that. Maxius folds his hands over his stomach and says, I can handle the regents. And Cheska's like, okay, but not journalists? And he says, well, we do have to strike quickly. We've done our best to acclimate the population. If they're not ready for a leader now, they never will be. If he can sit on the throne, that's still a concern. And then Bliss pops in. No, it's not. I figured it out. And Calder is like, have you been eavesdropping? You were invited to this meet. You could have just come in, Bliss. And she's like, I was waiting for the right moment, which I think is just delightful. She's out here just trying to be kind of extra. And frankly, I'm in it. I like it. So then we get the story of Urzaia. We go back in time and we find out about how Urzaia was made into what he is. And it's pretty much what you would expect. I thought more that he might have been abducted, that this would have been something that he did unwillingly, but he was given up by his mother, and his father had been a gladiator. So he had been in the, like, soaking in the atmosphere of bloody, brutal fighting from a child. And his mother signs him up for testing, and he never sees her again. And essentially, there doesn't seem like there's any grief there. His mother didn't want to take care of him, and that was it. And it worked, and she was rid of him. And he winds up being just such a good fighter that he is crushing all of the tests that he is given. And eventually, he gets accepted into the Champions Guild, but he thinks that it's over, and it turns out that is just the first step before they begin their experimentation and their adjustments. All of the things that they do to make it so that they are resistant to poison, they are resistant to exhaustion, they are resistant to weapons, they are resistant to magic, they are resistant to soulbound. Like, everything about this is usually 6 weeks. And he, for some reason, it goes like poorly for him. And he winds up in this situation for 6 months. And when he is released, everybody is genuinely surprised to see that he is still not only alive, not only whole, but also mentally sound. And Urzaia has to stop him and be like, hold on, I'm sorry. You were nearly tortured to insanity. And Urzaia's like, I mean, yeah, but it didn't work. It's so, like, Calder is so focused on what it was they were trying to do to him. And Urzaia is solely focused on what actually happened, which is that, look, I'm a happy person. They couldn't get to me in that sense. I was still solid and stable inside. And here I am. And Calder says something about how they should round up and execute all alchemists. And interestingly, Urzaia is like, no, you know what? Sometimes they do fucked up stuff. But it's not necessarily that they're a bad person. They did make me stronger. And sometimes pain is necessary to be stronger. And Calder is like, I guess. So then we find out just he was such an absolute monster that nobody could take him down. He is undefeated in a way that feels really unfair. Undefeated with, like, without breaking a sweat kind of thing. And there are people who have been organized specifically to take him down that he just rips apart, like a team of like 16 of them, I think. And yeah, 18. He fought them 2 at a time until all 18 lay dead or crippled, watching the fight master's face grow paler with each defeat. When he won the 9th fight in a row, the crowd stood to their feet and roared. So he thinks, that's what I'm going to get. More fights like that. And instead, they send him north into what I'm going to say is like Alaska. That's the vibe that I'm sort of imagining. And there is this group of people who are basically like, we're not part of the empire. We're doing our own thing and we don't need you. And he has been sent to take them down and administer punishment. And he thinks that he's going to be able to manage this in a year or two. 5 years later, and he's starting to realize, I can't do it. The snow creates the kind of atmosphere that he isn't equipped for. It's not that he can't handle it, but it's not the kind of like easy fight he's been used to. And they do kind of a guerrilla tactic where they come and attack him and then they like melt away back into the snow. And eventually he gets in a fight and gets injured. And some people rescue him who hadn't actually been on the receiving end of his violence. And he finally has a chance to just have a conversation and ask them, so why are you rebelling against the Empire? And basically what it comes down to is, what has the Empire ever done for us? We don't get any money. We don't get any roads. We don't get food or shelter. We don't get any defenders. We don't get anything. And yet we're expected to pay taxes into it. And for what? They're exploiting us. And finally, Urzaia is like, okay, you know what? You really have a good point here. So it says the final blow had come when an elder spawn invaded years before. It moved from village to village, spreading a disease that slowly turned people into monsters. By the time the Black Watch arrived, the whole region had been infected. They offered no explanation and taught the locals nothing. Instead, they killed everyone affected and half of the seemingly uninfected children. Then they vanished during the night. At that point, the villages had done something new. They called all their leaders together from all over the region and jointly decided to stop paying taxes. That was when the emperor finally took notice of them. And Urzaia we come back to him in the present, well, 5 years ago present, and he's saying, I thought the emperor just didn't understand the situation. So I stayed with them and helped, and I actually settled down and had a wife, and it was like boring, but it was also kind of nice. And then one day a navigator shows up, and they basically tell me, you're out of time and you need to kill as many people as you can until the remainder can fit on my ship, and then stuff them on the ship, and we will sail down and they will face trial. He says, not only did I tear up the order in his face, I was not so kind to the navigator or his crew. They sailed out much faster than they planned, I think. But now I regret that I did not kill them and send their ship to Kellerak, which honestly, I'm very interested in whether that would have worked. I kind of feel like the fact that the guy never came back would have resulted in just a delayed but similar reaction. But I don't know, maybe not. So he says 3 months later, 2 of my brother champions came to take me, and that is 8 and 9. And he says my punishment was being stripped of titles and rights as a champion and sentenced to death in the gladiators' arena of Axis. And Urzaia is like, yeah, that's where I was born, so that's fine. And also, I have to assume Urzaia would not die. It doesn't sound like that's something that, like, they make money, the Empire, off of the arena as well. So they're basically getting use out of him until he dies of battle anyway. So it ends with Urzaia saying, this is why you shouldn't trust the Emperor too much. He's not like they say he is. Maybe he cares about the Empire, but he does not care about its citizens very much. And Calder is like, holy shit. That's exactly what I have been saying. This guy is a monster. I need him. He has the same ideology as I do and the same understanding of the situation as I do. And he is also a fucking legend. I need to figure out a way to get him on my crew. And he asks Urzaia to basically like, wait. He's like, I'll come for you. I will figure it out. And Urzaia is like, all right, how long do you think? And Calder is just like, oh, I straight up don't know. So I'm over time, but there's still 1 chapter left. It's not too long. It's not too long in that a lot of it is action. And I feel like that doesn't need to be done play by play. But this is the part where we finally get Jyrene figuring out that Kellerak is an elder, a great elder. And it's really funny how long it takes. She hasn't got a clue. On what she determined was her 6th day, her self-proclaimed guide appeared again. And he calls her Mrs. Martin, and it really hits her very hard, which I think is interesting. The way that names work, and somebody might not be like technically wrong, but the way they address you, you're just like, what is that? And he says they're finally coming in, and she's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Do I just wait for them? And he says, this is what I want you to do. Stand in the spot as long as you can, using the full extent of your power to defend yourself. That's all. When at last you feel like you cannot continue, or you are about to lose your life, you can simply stand aside. And I am extremely curious about why this is what he wants her to do. Like, it's not like he's saying keep them back. Not really. He just wants her to put it all on the line, which isn't the same thing. And I just don't know what to make of this. And she finally asks, who are you? And she realizes, because he doesn't actually answer her, he says, I'm a business partner of your husband's. I'm the one who arranged for your jailbreak and ensuing expedition through the void. I assigned you here, Jyrene Tessela Martin, and I sowed the seed of this moment long before you were born. And she kneels and presses her forehead to the floor and is like, oh my God, Kellerak, my bad. So he is like, you can learn from me. The mysteries of this world are keys that can unlock any door, and they will be yours if you pay the price. And today I take my price in obedience. I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. And she's so trusting. She really believes that is the transaction that's going to happen. Girl. With Kellerak's knowledge, she could shock the world, prove to everyone, even Calder, that she'd been right, that she and her father were justified all along. And I'm like, oh my girl, no. Nobody's gonna think that, Jyrene. You know what? What do I know? Maybe they will. I might be totally wrong, and that's where the story goes, and I'll be shocked. Anyway, so then we go back to Calder with his crew as they are approaching this huge, weird, fleshy area. And he pulls his weapon and thinks to himself, if this doesn't work, I'll have ruined my clothes for no reason. Which I do really enjoy. Andal says, I hear you have to pay for the second set, which I did like. So he funneled his intent and read the Elder Spawn wall. As he'd suspected, it was a simple creature, fashioned for the sole purpose of keeping them away from this room. It focused on him, preparing to lash out with its whips of muscle, and he moved his blade where the lashes would strike. Raw elder sinew met orange and black mottled steel. The orange of the awakened blade flared, corrosive intent surged into the weapon, and the tendril blackened. And it's just so weird because this is like something that was a favor from Kellerak fighting against a thing that's also from Kellerak. I don't understand what's the point of this. And finally, he yells out Guildheads. They were only a pace or two ahead of him. And he says, I believe I can speed us up, but I have to get closer. So, long story short, he winds up getting through. And he's sort of startled once they do get through. That it's just like a carpeted room on the inside. Genuinely a moment of like, wait, is this it? He yells victory because he's a dodo. And he just is, he's a goober. He really is a little bit. It's fine. I like it. And there is a door that General Teach opens, and then a blast of green fire comes out, and Calder immediately is like, no, there's no way. But yes, it is. It is his wife. And he slaps it, the ball of green flame, out of the air. That was something he would never have attempted under other conditions. He didn't understand the intent in those green fireballs, nor did he fully understand the power in his own sword. Instead of canceling each other out, the effects could just as easily have fed on one another and burned him alive. And I was like, ooh, once he mentioned that, I was like, I guess this shit is kind of unpredictable. Just because you intend to defend yourself doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. And Jerry sees him and is like, what are you doing with the Imperial Guard? And he's like, hi, I'm Emperor now. I thought you would have figured that out. And she says, you see, he told you the truth. Who is he? Remind me on this, George. Somebody apparently said a thing. Is it Kellerak that said that he would be Emperor? Okay, I don't remember him actually like just spelling that out, but apparently she's really taking this as fucking evidence that he's like, ugh, Jerry, stop it. So we get the fight between her and Teach, with her fire and Tearfang and whatnot. And inches above the cage of steel bars that men called the Optasia, they met. The intent burned away the elder flesh surrounding the emperor's throne instantly. The heart-like muscle that had kept a grip on the metal dissolved into black powder. The force continued, tearing up floorboards and wall panels, rearranging and shattering furniture. But the Optasia caught that blend of deadly intent, accepted it, and sent it out to 1,000 relays all around the world. And this is what results in the fucking sky being broken. And when Calder wakes up, he has a moment of thinking he's on the ship and then realizes that it's reader burn. And he's sitting there like, what the fuck happened? And this is when Maya shows up. There is a champion here to kill him. And she saves his life. I had no idea who this was. And I had said earlier that a guy who mentioned men in black jumping from rooftop to rooftop, that was Lucan. But I think it must have been Maya, because I don't think Lucan was here this early. So that, unless it wasn't either of them, but I think it had to have been her. And they have a bit of a moment because she slits his throat and like almost decapitates him. And the guy is still fucking standing. It's a moment of, after the guy drops, Maya cuts the Achilles tendons on his feet. And then eventually some other guards come in and literally like chop his limbs off, because everybody is like, you don't know what you're getting with a champion. He could recover from God knows what. It's best to be safe. And Calder, he doesn't really have the stomach for this kind of thing. So he doesn't like watching this guy's body just be completely taken apart, dissembled. And he has to convince these new guards that Maya is his cook, that she's part of his crew, and is like, yeah, understandably, we don't really feel super comfortable here anymore. We're not safe, so you're going to have to take us somewhere else. And when he says, I don't want elder tentacles on the throne any more than you do, Maya had said, then we're on the same side. And he's like, that's really interesting. Okay. And the chapter ends with, while the guard was uncertain when faced with Maya, he knew exactly what to do with an injured ally. They practically carried him down the hall, sending for the palace alchemists, and Maya followed. And just for clarification, he's not like physically injured, but he has the reader burn, and that's what he wants to see a medic for, essentially. So that is the end of the chapter, and I'm really excited about the fact that Maya has been like sort of, I don't want to say won over, but they figured out they're not at odds the way they thought. I'm hopeful Shara will eventually cross over as well and realize that maybe they all want the same thing. Despite what fucking Jyrene is doing, murdering Lucan. Ugh. I'm not looking forward to seeing that scene again. Just FYI. All right. I am way over time. I'm going to have to go. I apologize for taking too long on that section, but it was full of very interesting stuff. Thank you again, George, very much for commissioning this and for feeding me info in the chat and reminding me of stuff. Appreciate you a lot. And I will be seeing you guys on Tuesday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.